This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
I just want to say, John, that was my choice was Raspberry Beret. If you have a request for a Prince song for the next segment, speak up now.
Well, we'll have to do Purple Rain.
Purple Rain, okay.
You can't.
All right.
Because a bad will would create a lot of blues.
Oh, that's the voice of John Lakes from LakesWhyteLLP in North Vancouver. And joining us for the first time today is Emmanuel Fung. You're the newbie there, I guess. You're the young hotshot lawyer in the firm. And
well, I don't know if I'm the hotshot.
Have they hazed you yet, or is there any kind of hazing that happens with lawyers? You have to buy them all lunch once a week? No, you're pretty good. All right, so the reason we bring up Prince is because this is a classic case of somebody with a lot of money, apparently $360 million plus, and then you have all of the royalties that will continue to be paid over the years, similar to Elvis Presley, and no will. I mean, how crazy is that? It could be a religious reason.
Well, I don't know. I mean, part of the issue, because we're just fits into the whole topic of capital gains. We'll talk about capital gains first, and then what you would do with Prince's situation. But the other thing that happens is when someone dies, all their capital gains come due as if they've sold it as well. So typically, let's say you have a cottage.
Yeah.
That mom and dad have never planned for. Or they bought the cat. They may have inherited it in Gibson's. It's been in the family for 60 years. So dad dies. He's the last of the family. First of all, you're going to have to pay probate fees. Second of all, you're going to have to determine the capital gains. So in 1994, there were some tax rules. So hopefully you can go back to determine a valuation in 1994. Then hopefully you have a record as to everything you paid in taxes and things like that. But eventually there's going to be a gain. So even if the kids want to keep the property, they're going to have to pay the capital gains to transfer the property over.
Mm-hmm.
And then last, but which was most painful about it, is because because the property is worth more than $275,000 recreational, you're going to have to pay Christy Clark property transfer tax as well. So the property is worth $1 million. Even if it's within the own family, you're going to have to pay $18,000 in property transfer tax. And also you're going to have to pay capital gains. I mean, you can avoid it if you sit down and talk to somebody and start doing a planning before.
I hear some people are taking cottages and putting them into a kind of a trust, right?
Trust or a corporation. I prefer a corporation. Now, it's not like in Ontario where people have a lot more of a tradition of cottages.
Mm-hmm, right.
There's whole law firms in the
Muskokas
areas and accountants who specialize in cottage law.
Really?
But especially if you've got a family cottage that's going to stay within the family, particularly if you're going to have one child who may want it and somebody else doesn't, you've got to make sure you've got the planning, because if not, the tax consequences could be horrendous. And second of all, you may have difficult determining the information you need to determine what the capital gain is as well.
So maybe it's just better to rent a cottage every summer.
I don't know. My wife and I have never owned a cottage because we're restless. We're great guests, but the idea of going up in February somewhere to get a roof off your house is...
Yeah. It's. I grew up with that cottage life. I mean, I can totally understand it. But yeah, the conversation always comes up, like, because now you've got 3 children and they've got 2 children each. So you've got this multiplying effect. Every generation, there's more people want to use the family cottage. Well, how do you share it? I mean, these are the practical things. But then you have when somebody passes away. So from what I hear, it's, as you said, a corporation or a trust, and it's not owned by one person. It's owned by many people.
Yeah. I mean, the difference is, if you live in Toronto or Montreal, there's no way in hell you want to spend the time in the summer, right?
Yeah.
So you got Vancouver, you can spend the summer here.
That's true. Now, the more people will move here, John. That's the problem. That's why we say it rains here all the time. It's to keep people from moving here. It doesn't really rain that much. All right, so Prince, famous singer, songwriter. So he's got a $350 million plus estate, no will. And some people think it could be because he's a Jehovah's Witness. Possibly, but regardless, there's no will. He doesn't have a child. He had a child that passed away, and then he's got brothers and sisters.
His parents are deceased as well.
Yeah. So what do you do?
Well, we're going to talk about it. So the first thing about his estate is that it's a very complex estate. So someone has to get in there real quick. Because I'm sure within the day of death, people are trying to send out bogus prints in Medelia. Maybe he had a company to enforce copyright and things like that.
He was very, very strict with copyright. Yeah, I know that because he would crack down on those things really vigorously.
So my understanding is his sister was appointed by the courts in Minnesota very quickly to be the administrator of all his estate until they figured out what to do, which gave her legal authority. Now, because he didn't have a will, we're not sure whether it was his sister he really wanted to be the administrator. It might have been his business manager, but that's the way things are. And then you have to start looking for beneficiaries.
So, at least in BC, and I don't know about Minnesota law, if you don't have a will, the government sort of makes a will for you. They've got a list of who gets what.
So let's just assume this happened in British Columbia. Say he lived here.
So say Prince lived here. So if he had a spouse, which he didn't, spouse would have received, spouse and no children, spouse would have received everything.
Right.
If he had a spouse and, he and his spouse had some children, the spouse would receive what's called the spousal share, which is $300,000 and then half of the rest. And the children get the
other half.
The other half, right. Rules are different again if you've got, spouse from a previous relationship, or spouse and children from a previous relationship. The spousal share changes, and then if you've got multiple spouses, which is possible in BC, spouses would split the spousal share. But what has to happen now, given that Prince has no children and no spouse, you have to figure out who his next of kin is. Now, I can't remember. So was Prince's father alive? Or
No.
No, the story behind Prince is that his parents are deceased. The advantage with women, you usually know who their children are. And I think with his mother, I think he has 2 other siblings. Problem is his father was a bit of a rolling stone. So they're not exactly sure how many
I heard up to 8 or something.
Yeah, they're not sure how many children the father had.
And in the eye of the law, is a half brother sister the same weight as a full-blooded brother or sister?
It is, yes. And so what they have to do now is they have to figure out who Prince's brothers and sisters are. Who his father's children are, who his mother's children were, and they would, divide the estate.
But it goes further because one of Prince's brothers was deceased, and they're not sure whether this was his full brother, a half brother or step brother. And then this brother is alleged to have, because it then goes into the next generation, nieces and nephews.
So if we'll pick a number of 10, right? So there's 10 brothers or half brothers and sisters that are out there.
Yeah.
So that estate gets divided 10 ways.
That's right.
So now his 1/10 would then go down to his children.
His next generation.
Right.
So the problem you've got is that this guy who is deceased has a child who may or may not be his child. So then you have to go back. Now at least we have DNA, and presumably they've got enough DNA samples of Prince to determine who his relatives are. And hopefully there's DNA samples of the
brother,
and hopefully then you're so just to at the end it may be that his sister may have to go to court and say, well, who are the beneficiaries?
So it'd probably be easier just to say who everybody's got a claim. Let's just do the DNA test, and that's pretty conclusive, isn't it? You would hope. You're not specialists in DNA testing.
Well, hopefully, but it's not like this sort of thing happens in BC. Actually, we see this every now and then where someone's passed away. Maybe they have a will, maybe they don't. But in any case, we can't figure out who the next of kin would be. They may have immigrated from Germany or somewhere in Europe, and they never let anyone know who their siblings were, and we have to go out and find these siblings.
And how do you do that? You have private investigative firms, or is that how it works?
With 5 private investigators. We've now got a firm Facebook page because that sometimes
people are on Facebook. You can do Facebook search for people who.
But is there companies that do this tracing work?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, there are, and we work with a couple of them when we need to. But if you can, there are easier ways to avoid this expense. That's one of the lessons I think that come out of doing probate is that you can actually plan your way in a way to ensure that your executor won't have to go looking for the next of kin. That's something that I think would be even first on the list. When you're thinking about a will, think about whether you need to tell your lawyer about siblings that you may or may not have or that you don't know about.
So is it just easy in the will to list all of your siblings?
Yeah, I mean, you could, or you do a declaration. I mean, going back to Prince's sister, I mean, she's got a horrendous job to do now. And, I mean, technically, I guess she's took the task on because she was his relative. Presumably, I mean, she'll be compensated for all the work she's doing. But
or maybe she was the closest to him or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it did work. I mean, Elvis Presley, when he died, his ex-wife Priscilla was actually the executor of his will, and she transformed a broke, has-been rock and roll star's estate into a...
Don't tell my mother-in-law that. She just worships Elvis.
But he still was broke at the time of his death.
Mm-hmm.
And she created into a multi-million-dollar empire.
Now that's the other thing is that
so maybe Prince's sister, but at least Elvis had appointed Priscilla on as executor. I mean,
but that's what I'm getting at. You say you sort of finalize the amount that the person has in their estate, but somebody like Prince, now that he's passed away, people have gone and bought a bunch of records. They've downloaded all this music online. I mean, it's a moving target. The amount of money. That's a breathing entity. Music lives on forever. Royalties are paid. Movie will be made of his life. All of that kind of stuff. So the money keeps flowing in.
Well, not only that, but she has to. She's going to have the authority to engage other people, and of course, it's not going to just be in Minnesota as well. They'll probably have to enforce the laws in the United States and China, and I mean, this is a huge task that she's going to have to. And I don't know if she had a job before, but now she's got a career. But
yeah, and then if you're dealing with movie producers in Hollywood, you've got to deal with them.
And eventually, she's going to have to account for all these people, some of who she may not even know, because and in some ways, it's you could have people or virtual. You could have a guy. Let's say a guy lives in Cheyenne, Wyoming, who's never even met Prince, and all of a sudden he's getting 10% of the goodies.
For what reason?
Because he's a half brother.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, then he's legally entitled.
Yeah, but morally, he probably has no obligation.
Yeah. Does the law look at it that way? The moral obligation.
That's why you have a will. If you had a will, you could get around.
But we don't have a will in this case.
We're talking about what's in British Columbia we call it administration. So, but I think the important thing is people should understand. There's this myth that if you die without a will, it goes to the government. Nothing goes to the government. Even if you've got someone who dies with no relatives, I think the money has to sit with the government for 100 years before it can go to the government. So.
Really? That's interesting.
But at the same time, you ask if there's sort of a moral.
So the one brother who is related and never even knew he was related to Prince has standing in the eyes of the law.
But it's only if you've. There's no spouses and no children, right? So, I think people usually perceive themselves, and parents, and they perceive themselves as being, having obligations, moral obligations to spouses and children and parents. And, this rule that it goes to the brothers really only applies if all those people have passed away or they don't exist, right?
And that's the case with Prince, is he's only got siblings left. And so that's where it's going to go.
I'm sure there's going to be one or two people pop up claiming.
I bet you.
And you see, if somebody pops up and proves they're the child,
they get
and
it
the
all.
only child, they win the jackpot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the first thing they may do is fire his sister.
We'll have to stay tuned, as they say, in our business. All right, we're talking about estate law. We're speaking with John Lakes and Emmanuel Fung from LakesWhyteLLP in North Vancouver, and we'll continue the conversation next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.